Thank you all for joining us for today's Introduction to Research Writing for Social Sciences and Interdisciplinary Studies workshop. Joining us today is Brittany Sterling, MS, MLS, Assistant Professor, Social Sciences and Interdisciplinary Studies Librarian at UNLV Libraries. In this workshop, we'll be discussing ways to save yourself time, learn what to expect when it comes to dealing with institutional review board related writing, and how to chart a timeline that will set you up for success. I'll go ahead and hand it over to Brittany to get us started.
Oh, thank you. Hi, everyone. Nice to see some familiar faces on the screen, or familiar names, I guess I should say. So you all definitely already know who I am. For those who I haven't met yet, you just heard who I am. My title is obnoxiously long, so you don't have to say it 3 times fast or anything. But very nice to meet you. I actually changed this up a little bit for those of you who've seen it before. We're going to spend the bulk of the time talking about IRB writing, which is a part of research writing people don't necessarily think about in the beginning, but I did that so you don't have to, kind of thing, so you don't get stuck like I did. And I added some other things. We also have some sort of unearthed databases is the way I'll say it. We've had them, but I never thought about them in regards to research writing, but they definitely are. And so I'm going to show you all those right at the end. And I will try to definitely keep an eye on the time because I want you to get to that part too. So let me share my screen really quickly. And those of you who know me well know I'm a tab queen, so don't judge me. That's all I have to say. Alrighty. I think I'm just going to share my whole desktop because that's easier right now. Let's see if Zoom will allow it. Okay, so let me actually get to the thing y'all need to see because we will get to this grant, but I want to get you here first. Yep, okay. Can everyone see? I can't see the chat. So can you tell me if you see this Google presentation?
Yes, we see the Google presentation. If questions come up in the chat, I'll let you know, but okay. You're not in presentation mode right now.
Oh, okay, yeah, okay. So I will hit slideshow. Cool.
Yes.
Now y'all can see it in presentation mode?
Perfect, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
All right, so y'all know what this workshop is about. Some of you have heard a version of it before. I hope for those of you who are new to it, it'll be helpful because it's some hard fought knowledge, y'all. So hopefully I could save you some time. So I don't want any of you looking like this meme when you're done with this writing project. Of course, we're all glad we get to the end, but no one wants to look like they, had to walk through Middle Earth to get there. And I felt like that on some of my projects. And because the librarians here are faculty, we are always publishing. Sometimes I still feel like this, but we're going to hope that you don't after this presentation. Okay, so if you want to conduct an original research project, there's a lot more than even the IRB. Lets you know kind of when you're chatting with them, when you interview with them. And so, of course, y'all can always go to the IRB website. You can either search it on the UNLV homepage, or you can go to I'll show you in a second, the research division, Office of Research, something like that. You'll see in a sec. And you can ask them the IRB specific stuff, but I'm going to give you the writing prompts that you need kind of to think about your time, the extra things you're going to need to write, and maybe some duplicate things you have to make and maybe say in similar, but not exactly the same ways. Okay. So what I hope you'll take away is that, and I know y'all know this at this point, there's more to a writing project than just the writing. However, there's also more writing to the writing project than you think when it comes to IRB writing or doing an original research project, like what y'all will be doing in boot camp. There's also the multiple steps involved, which is where we'll spend most of the time. I've got some tips for study design for you, because actually the way you write up your study design might actually delay or allow your project to go forward with IRB. And also for doing a lot of group collaborative writing work. Obviously every group has their own dynamic, but if you haven't done it before, I have some tips for you. If you have done it before, sometimes group writing is a pain in the butt, y'all. I know this. And so maybe there's some other ways to look at it than what you've done before. Excuse me. And like I mentioned, I wrote databases here, but what I really mean is I'll show you some research guides that will help you set up your project and also help you with the adjacent parts that aren't just the writing. Okay, so You mean the final paper isn't everything? I'm sorry to tell you guys, it's not. There's so much more to it. So y'all know that writing has tentacles, as I like to put it. So for instance, even if you are doing a human subjects project, which is usually what you will do if you're doing a social sciences or interdisciplinary studies project, if it's not within the physical sciences, you may need grant funding to get things done or pay your interviewees or for certain parts of the project to take place, like transcription. It takes writing to get those, so you've got to think about adding that into your timeline and also the effort into making that, because oftentimes with grants, I can tell you from experience, sometimes what the grant writers are asking you for has nothing to do with your project writing. And so you'll have to take some additional time to do that. You've got to write up the study design that includes the questions themselves and also whatever format you're going to use, like survey or interview questions. You've got to write up the consent forms, which you'll see a little bit later. You definitely want to be thinking at the beginning, how will you disseminate your findings? I like to say begin with the end in mind, which is kind of that part, because it will make a big difference if you're doing a poster. If the idea is to actually submit to a journal for publication, if you're writing a book chapter, etc. I know these are logical, like kind of duh things that y'all like logically know. But for instance, if you're writing up a poster, the way you're going to have to write up what you found is going to be very, very different than if you're submitting to a top journal in your field, which I, once again, know you logically know, but you want to be thinking about that for your timeline. Are you going to use theories, hypotheses, or both? Definitely makes a difference in the way you write up the paper overall and how you explain your subject matter to IRB, more importantly. And then, of course, I have to advocate as a librarian, building in plenty of research time. I know you need it anyway, but a lot of times you won't have time to do things like diagram others' work and let it spark sort of what you're thinking and maybe a direction in your project if you don't build in plenty of research time first before you can get to the writing. All right, moving on. So a very brief introduction to the UNLV Division of Research. That's what it's called. It's made up actually of the Office of Sponsored Programs, the IRB, and then there are a few other parts of the research division. One of them actually does cannabis research or approves those projects. There's one that is strictly for the Office of Undergraduate Research for undergraduate projects, if you have mentees or anything like that, that also are trying to get in on the research game. And then we have several other things. Usually I show you this page on the UNLV site, but since I know we're running a little bit behind, I will leave it to you to find later. But if you just Google or look in the search bar for Division of Research, it'll take you where you need to go. All right, so for the IRB specifically, what does it even do? The IRB stands for Institutional Review Board, and it approves, monitors, and reviews biomedical and social behavioral research involving human subjects. Once again, a mouthful. If y'all are at this presentation with me, you're looking to do a social sciences project, likely involving human subjects or something having to do with the humanities or the social sciences. I do not know where this typo about COVID-related changes is. I thought I caught them all, y'all, so give me a little bit of grace there. Its main concern is protecting the rights of the people who will participate in research. So I'm sure at this point in your careers, possibly, especially if you're looking at social sciences research, you have either been told about or come across studies like the Milgram prison experiment or brown eye, blue eye, where we learned a lot about human behavior, but to the detriment of the participants. That's what the IRB is for, to make sure that human subjects can actually interact in a research project, but that it is not under duress or mental stress or anything else like that. They make sure the study benefits outweigh the risks and that participants fully understand what's happening. And so you will be asked to actually repeat a bunch of times in the system that we use called Cayuse. It is now fully online. We used to do a bunch of paper forms, but now it's fully online. Ways in which you will protect your subjects. And so you'll have to think about what that means, how you're going to do it, and then answer in slightly different ways depending on the question, the same thing a bunch of times. Okay, so how does IRB affect your writing deadlines? Well, the IRB meets monthly at most institutions. However, my caveat to this is, I am not sure why, but IRBs have sort of been hit very hard over pandemic life and post-pandemic life now. as far as turnover. And so even here at UNLV, I'm not sure if they've redone hiring since, but whereas the IRB was meeting monthly because it's a group comprised, or the board is a group of people across the curriculum, we didn't actually have that many staff members in the literal IRB office. And so things were getting backed up. And like I said, I'm not sure if that's been improved yet, but I just want to throw that out there for y'all. You definitely want to at least contact them early enough to know if you're going to have a delay. That's what I'll say. So when things are working well, they should meet monthly at most institutions. There can be committee chair turnover though over the summer and at semester breaks. And so if they don't have a full board, they also won't meet. So that's the other thing to think about. The board is comprised fully of volunteers across the curriculum. And so just because the time we're living in, I would just say be doubly sure you check the timeline or see if they're having delays because they don't have folks. I mentioned Cayuse. I'm not going to show it to y'all today, but you can once again put it in the search bar and see what I'm talking about, or go to that division of research and there's a section about Cayuse. You would use it to stay up to date about when you can move on to your next step, because after the IRB meets, they still have to approve the project or reject the project or send it back for revision. And then you have to wait until they meet again for it to get approved. But now, instead of getting an email, which you used to do in our system, you have to log in to, or get, if you have your notifications turned on, you can get an update. But our Cayuse adoption was kind of sticky in the beginning. So I would just say, make sure you spend a lot of time learning the platform too. And then also know that it may not be as straightforward as a literature-based research project, like a lit review or, you know, generally a summation article or something like that. When there's human subjects, you know, humans often just introduce different things because we're human beings. And so you might get caught in a place, or even like in my last project, we got caught up on transcription because there were a lot of human transcriptionists that either quit during the pandemic or prices raised during the pandemic versus when we actually got quoted prices for humans. And now there's, of course, AI and generative AI, which you can use. However, there's some research ethics things around that, which I'll get to. And so you've got to think about all of that. And all of that affects the deadline of you actually getting to the final paper writing. So I know it sounds like I'm harping on it a lot, but I promise I'm doing that because that was me. So I would like you to not have that problem. Okay. So writing for the IRB is not like writing your average, you know, conference proposal or book chapter proposal, any other kind of scholarship you're normally publishing. It can definitely make you feel like you're on another planet. The IRB world is very, very specific. And you all know at this level, academia is just like a different beast than being in another industry. And so here are the basic submission requirements you'll need for an IRB project. Things like study recruitment documents, and you'll see what I mean in a second. You will have to fill out these little fields in Cayuse that kind of say what you're asking your participants for. So I have some examples from Instagram, from Facebook. I've done some recruiting on LinkedIn, or have plotted out some recruiting that's going to take place in my next project. That's what I mean by study recruitment documents. You do actually have to put it on a piece of paper in some instances and upload that file. So you could put it easily in a Google Doc, but you need the blurbs to be actually in a collective sort of piece of paper. You also need detailed study info, which I'll go over, consent forms. Depending on your methodology, are you using a questionnaire, an interview guide, or other data collection instruments? You have to write all of that out also, which is why I call it research writing. If you need facility authorization, so I will say in my last project, when I started it, we were still in the middle of the pandemic. And so we weren't having our interview subjects coming here to UNLV, and we wouldn't have based on who our population was anyway. However, if you needed people to, sorry, my light is going off, y'all. Let me turn it on. If you needed people to, let's say, come to a specific part of the library in my case, or you wanted to meet people in one of the psychology buildings, then you need the authorization of the facility to do that, and they need to know what you're doing. So you may have to write for permission for that. You also might need them to write something up for you and sign it. So that's something to think about. And then agreement, so that's things like authorizations. If you have volunteers like grad students working with you, or you're doing some sort of co-project. If you have student workers working with you, you've got to write that up. how data is going to be used, especially for our IRB or in our software in particular. You need to be able to tell how long you're going to keep people's data, how you're going to make sure it's encrypted, which person in the party, like in my case, it was a group project, who's the principal investigator and how are they going to be the only one who has access to certain things. And then also things like funding or sponsor information. And the last project I did was grant funded. So I had to write up who was giving it and for what and why kind of thing. All right, so as far as study recruitment docs, I kind of mentioned this already. Social media messaging, so things like screening tools, posts specific to each platform. If you use a hashtag, you've got to write that up and think about it in advance. If you are adding people on Twitter, now X, right? It's not my best platform, whatever it's called now. If you're gonna add people in a Zeet, I think I heard someone call them, you've got to specify what that is. Email copy. So this is a place I just want to really harp for y'all because I was the principal investigator of my last project. As a group, we actually thought about the initial email, the first follow-up, the thank you, and we gave gift cards, so the incentive email. However, then we also needed to think about what happens when we're done with the study. And in our case, we presented first and we'll be doing the write-up this fall. So we told all the participants, we'd let them know when we actually did that. We forgot to write up the email that said, hey, we actually did the thing and now we blah, 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 blah. You've got to resubmit that to the IRB when you don't do that. So I'm sure y'all get the point, but there are a bunch of little things that you might not think about. And yeah, I just want to save you some of the trouble I had. And then also if you're recruiting, especially like youth, you want to make sure you have a place specific interest flyer, or in our case, maybe it's an email, or do people even do e-invites anymore? Who knows? I feel like we moved on from those, but just in case whatever you're using, if it's place-based, then you'll want to make sure you're calling out the place. Like in this place, I have the example of the YMCA. Do kids go to the YMCA anymore? I have no idea. I don't have kids in my life.
I don't think it exists anymore. I never heard of them.
Yes, I don't think we have many of them in Vegas.
Yeah.
Cecilia, you tell me, you've been here for a while. Tell me in the chat. Okay, so social media messaging, I guess I gotta go in and change this from Twitter to X actually, y'all. So this is just an example. If you at someone, y'all can read it as is here. If you hashtag them instead, you would have to submit this. So in this case, we were studying career experiences of mid-career administrators who've attained an institutional leadership role over the course of the pandemic. If you create a bit.ly link, you also have to make sure it matches in every single one of these messages, as well as the way that you write it up in your documents. So just keep that in mind also, because things like bit.ly links and tiny URLs are free. Unfortunately, someone might have had the same idea as you already. So if you have to add like 123 or 879 or whatever after it, you'll just want to make sure that you know for sure what order things are in. So when you're giving it to people, you're not sending them to a dead link. You know what I'm saying? So y'all get kind of the point here. This is also Facebook and Instagram example. So this is the same thing, but we tried to make it sound more like this is kind of a mix of what I actually wrote and some anonymized things. To make it sound more like you would post on Facebook. You wouldn't write it the same as Twitter because of the character count, right? And so the second one is more telling the purpose of the study. If you're interested in lending your voice to this emerging area of scholarship, gives the same information, but you want to think about the tone. And when you're asked in the IRB form, you've got to make sure that they don't match or you don't copy paste. Otherwise, it'll get kicked back to you. Okay. As far as LinkedIn messaging is concerned, there's a few ways you can go about this because y'all know with LinkedIn, like, I don't know if I would recommend kind of cold messaging people in their LinkedIn DMs because I think a lot of times people ignore those because they get a lot of ads that way. I can say I do for that reason. Like, for instance, people asking me if I want to go to grad school when I have 2 master's degrees at this point. I'm good. Not saying you can't get a third one if you want it, but you know what I mean. So I would sort of make sure you're targeting the right place, right? And then you can do something quippy, like calling all higher ed professionals. Please consider joining colleagues from UNLV for a study. Once again, same purpose, asking if they're interested in lending their voice. you would be surprised how your tone in these things makes people respond or not respond. People really have a lot to say, especially post-pandemic, about a lot of things because life has been crazy. And so I would say, even if it goes against your nature a little bit, to not just be super practical and ask a flat out question. Sometimes getting at people's sort of human behavior is the way you get participants for this. So y'all get the point in that one. This is my second LinkedIn message. This was me actually messaging sort of an anonymized version of me messaging groups and associations that we knew would be interested in this project, right? And so in this one, we did more of a dear colleagues kind of thing. We explained who we were. And it's a very bizarre experience, y'all, I will say, to start being a researcher who's known for their work. I will say that at least as a junior faculty member, when you know that your name kind of carries some cachet and people might do a thing because they know who you are. And so what I say is, when you're trying to get these projects done, if you think you can use your name because people recognize you as a researcher and respect your work, you better use that because it'll make your life easier, right? And so this is kind of saying the same thing, except in here I elaborated on, who we were recruiting, who specifically. This was a library project. Obviously, this message is not about libraries, but we tend to do research on colleagues in the US and Canada, mostly here over in North America, because we share the same association. And so I kind of explain that. People will know what that is, even if they don't know us, right? And then sort of signing it, who's the principal investigator and who's the co-investigator. Sometimes that matters to people. It is weird, but sometimes we have weirdos in academia. Y'all know what I mean. So if you think that you being the principal investigator on something makes a difference to people, include it in the message. It can't hurt, right? Okay. And so just to follow up on those emails that I mentioned to you, right? Make sure you think really, really hard about all of the emails you need to send. You might still miss one, but just know you ethically are supposed to go back and resubmit if you leave one out, like the last one about your presentation or something. You're supposed to go back and submit that to IRB just so they can make sure, you didn't like cuss out all your study participants because you're glad the project's over. You know what I'm saying? And so just make sure to think about them at the beginning. And so then you don't have to go back. A good rule of thumb is an initial email to listservs or personal networks, if you can think about that. One follow-up email to those who are correct study fit. And so this is where thinking also about all of the screening tools you'll need. So like when you have your audience in mind, you'll need some way to screen them, whether you're using Qualtrics, let's say, or like in our case, we sent out all of those social media messages kind of that you saw to specific listservs that served our audience, to our personal social media accounts, because we have in library land, a lot of people like Twitter, for instance. And so they will be looking for things like that on there. You'll also want an email with a link to the study tool. If you should think about setting up a calendar as soon as you're going to have things going live, and the interview time slots, because y'all know we're all distractible. It's a busy world. If people have to come back to a link twice, then even if they just forget, they may forget. So you kind of get one opportunity at recruitment kind of thing. And so you'll want an email that goes out to people immediately if they actually engage with your link, for sure. A thank you email, of course, because everyone's time is short these days. And then a follow-up email, especially if you offered an incentive to the winners or the recipients or participants. You'll have a whole different thing I don't really go over the financial bit. What I will say is go to your department chair, or if you have an admin assistant that helps with finances, and talk to them also early about incentives for your participants, because we have some interesting rules, is what I'll say, here at UNLV. If your money doesn't go through the Office of Sponsored Programs, and even if it does, sometimes you have to go there and then also go through your sort of department finance person, or in the library's case, our library finance person. And so you'll want to have an email about, in all of those calls to action, I said, if you're interested and you click this link and you're selected, you'll get a $25 gift card to Amazon. Well, then you need to tell people, hey, you were selected, and you'll get your gift card at this point in the study, right? Because you don't want people who think they're just their only job was to click through the screening tool, and now they like have an Amazon gift card, right? Like we gave all of ours out after the interviews, and so you'll need to be super specific about what the steps are for those folks. And then just in case a study delay happens, also happened to me, y'all, I would suggest just typing one up just in case, something very simple that says like you hit a snag, or if you know someone will be out because of a medical emergency, or you just have an idea that someone's going to take a research leave or an extended leave of absence and you don't want to go on without them, better to have written it up in the beginning than once again to interrupt your flow of things because you had to go back and do it. So like I said, you can certainly not do these things, but it'll create problems for you later. So I'm sure y'all are smart cookies. You get the point. All right, just checking the time. So places you can get tripped up, your verbiage needs to communicate the same idea, but it may be asked about in different ways. And so, for instance, this is going to be a silly example, but it's just coming off the top of my head. If someone asks you, what color is the sky? And someone also asks you, is the sky blue? Are those the same question? They're getting at the same answer, but they're not quite the same thing, right? That's kind of how the IRB form is. It's asking you for a lot of the same information, but it wants you to answer slightly differently. However, you don't want to answer so differently that it messes things up for you, because if your answers don't match, then it'll get kicked back and you'll have to resubmit and resubmit. If anything changes from the original proposal, like you found some theory in the middle of it that you didn't talk about or something like that, you might have to update it in different places, which is usually actually the easier bit than getting it through the first time. And then the IRB is comprised of humans, as you all know. So you got to be patient, especially for the reasons that I mentioned. That's why I always say check in with them much earlier than you think you need to, because yeah, it's a wild research world out there, y'all, is what I'll say. And then even when you quadruple check something, you may be asked to change it. And so just really quickly, what I'll say is in the first project that I did, I'm now in my second original research project, we had something go through as a group. It was fine. We got it sent back needing one thing changed. And then when we resubmitted it, maybe a different reviewer looked at it and was like, oh, you need this thing changed. So then we need to resubmit it. So just know that the same person isn't always looking at your thing either. And so the reason I talk about this as research writing is because you may think that you were super clear and you were fine the first go around, and then someone else may be looking at it the second time and they don't think you were super clear. So you might have to rewrite it or tweak your language or something like that. All right, so I'm sure y'all have thought about this at this point. I know I've helped some of you with your projects already, so you're past this, but you really want to think about it like you're talking to the lay person is the best way I know how to put it. Even though we're working in our academic bubbles, kind of, you want your study information to make sense to, let's say, my expertise is sociology. If someone from the math department was volunteered for the IRB board and was reading my proposal, I would need them to understand it enough to say yes. And so you just want to go all the way back to basics, like your freshman research writing paper, right? Like, what's the central problem of the study? What's the field of study that's important to the problem? What are the methods you're going to use? Really, when you get to why the study is important, this is where you get to flex a little bit of creativity and also kind of show your chops as a researcher. Because if I'm a math person, I don't know or care about the humanities. Please tell me on why you want to do this project, right? And so you'll have to think about not just the practical about why it's important, but especially in something like sociology, which is about societal outcomes, right? Like, for instance, we know sometimes we have a little bit of water problem here in the Valley, right? Most people think, oh, what happens if we run out of water to bathe or drink or whatever, right? But that's also a social problem because, as you all know, we have a lot of people moving here because Las Vegas is the hot place to move right now, right? And so that also makes a difference with all the subdivisions being built. What happens if we're already having water issues and all of these subdivisions are being built? So you can sort of flex your, not just your know-how, but also sort of speak to your expertise and maybe get someone excited about a project that has nothing to do with them. You know what I mean? And that also gets at the significance to academia and the world at large, and also why someone else should be concerned. Like a math person might be more concerned with the stats behind a hydrologist study than why we shouldn't be building any more subdivisions in the valley. You know what I mean? But you might be able to get them interested because maybe they're interested in buying one of those houses in a new subdivision, and you might get them to think about it a little different. You know what I mean? Okay. So of course you want to specify the problem. And also it's very important when the research problem is multifaceted or complex. And so what I'll also say is if you're doing a mixed method study, which I won't get into research methodology for social sciences right now, but if you're going to be, you need to be super tight on your numbers and super tight on the theory. And so it really helps to think about those things when you're submitting this to the IRB, because then if you need to tweak it, you've already thought through most of the problems with using those things. And yeah, I just feel like social science research is always complex because it's never about just one thing, in my opinion. And so you'll definitely want to be able to state your rationale of your research project in writing in an engaging way, once again, and why it's worthwhile to conduct. And then also present the core problems, because remember, everyone reading your proposal is not in your field. And so one of the things I feel like all of us tend to do is start talking in jargon, right? And you're able to add in some of that to prove your expertise, right? But don't assume that someone reading your sociology proposal is in the social sciences. Even someone who is, like, let's say a cultural anthropologist or something, their language is totally different than the world of like structural functionalism, you know what I mean? And so, or whatever your discipline happens to be. And so just also remember that as you're writing things up, so people aren't like doing a head scratch with what you're talking about, you know? Okay, so this is just a different way to think about it. Same questions. What's the topic you want to study? That's what it boils down to. Why is it worthwhile? What is the practical and valuable outcome you're helping solve for? How does it build upon other people's research, which is super important, especially if you're going to use other people's theories, y'all. You definitely need to spend some time, maybe even like picking out what those theories will be, the tenets you're going to use, and then you want to be able to sort of briefly explain that in your proposal. And because you can also improve on research, don't forget. And so in fact, I think that's pretty flattering as a researcher, right? And so you'll want to explain exactly why you want to improve on that, and then what specific tasks you've got to do. So this is kind of where the creative brain and the practical split. How and when will you write the conclusion? What, like I said, which theories do you need to prove or pull? Do you just want one? Do you want three? Do you need a certain methodology? Do you need a support under that methodology? These are all things I had to find out in real time. So I hope I'll be saving you some time. And also, these projects blow up really fast, y'all. Like, I gotta say, last writing boot camp, I had a bunch of folks who were dissertating. A lot of times, especially with the research component, which is the thing you need to do before you start the writing, right? Sometimes that data set does not exist. That is why you're researching, and you might have to be the researcher that compiles that. If you find out that's the case based on what you want to do, maybe you don't have time to be the researcher who compiles it. So how can you tweak your project or the scope of your project so you can still get it done and finish in time without having to create like a whole job for yourself, right? Y'all are trying to, those of you who are working on your dissertations are trying to dissertate so you can get to that point, right? Not do it before. So just throwing that out there. Okay, and yeah, especially elaborating on methodological detail, I think is very helpful, especially in social sciences, because I think part of the reason people like to call us the soft science is because they don't believe that we are super serious about the numbers. However, in my opinion, I'm a qualitative girl. I'm always going to be that. There's so much rich data to pull out of there, but you need to do it in a soundly methodological way so that researchers in other areas who tend to, let's say, not respect quite as much our social sciences research really can see that you had sound methodology behind what it is you're talking about. You also will want to put some limits on your study, like I said, so you're not trying to research the whole world in a year or 6 months. And then don't forget to define that jargony stuff I mentioned, like your key terms or your concepts. You can do that early in the intro, do it in the lit review. Yeah, things that I know that y'all know, but especially when you get to the graduate level, I think you can kind of forget. And so just harping on that. Okay, so I'm keeping my eye on the time because I want to get y'all to those databases. So we'll fly through study design pretty quickly. As I just mentioned, not quite the same as methods, but tied in kind of because you need them both to get through to the result, right? And so I just want to highlight a few different types, and I'm highlighting them because you also have to write these up and submit them to the IRB. Otherwise, you will get your thing kicked back, and you actually can't start your project until it's approved, technically. And so, for instance, mine was mostly interviewing folks, and so we had to write up all of our interview questions. We ended up having about 25, and some of them had part A's and part B's, and if yes, this, and if no, that, and you've got to write all of that up and submit it to IRB before you can get started. So questionnaires tend to provide information. You can do them as yes, no's, or succinct answers. Surveys tend to be constructed with a specific purpose in mind and usually have some open-ended questions, in my opinion, in social sciences research. These are not always definitions, but just want to toss that out there for y'all. And also it's helpful with interview questions to think about how they'll help you answer your research question. So while someone's answer might be interesting, it doesn't mean it will actually necessarily get at the main research question that you're telling IRB you're trying to solve. And so you kind of have to do a dance with yourself about what will I get from having someone answer this? Especially, I will add an aside, if you're going to transcribe the answers to something like interview questions, the time is literal money. So for instance, if you can get enough answers in 10 questions with just a few if yes this, if no that answers versus 25, as we discovered, then when you go to transcribe it, it will cost you a lot less money. And also, yeah, it'll just save you a lot of time because sometimes you have to go through and clean up those transcripts as well. And that takes its own time too. Okay, so just some examples of questionnaires. This is kind of getting at the difference in why you would use them, what information you're trying to extract. So y'all can see here, how often do you use Adobe in the course of your administrative duties? This is people are going to give you their different answers, but they're already preset sort of prompts for them to answer with. In this case, all of them are like that, sort of a person will choose from what you've already set up for them. A survey example of the difference is, and it can have some questionnaire questions, but it usually also has some open-ended ones like these. What's been the hardest part of becoming an administrator over the course of the pandemic? Why'd you choose to apply for an administrative role? And how has becoming an administrator positively impacted your life? I hope that people are giving one-word answers to this, which is what you want as the researcher, right? But sometimes people's answers will be shorter or longer, but you want to give them space in something like a survey. Then I've got an interview prompt example for y'all. So this is an example, like I was saying, of these A/B or if yes this, if no that questions. So as y'all can see in question 1, tell us about yourself. Not really a question, but we have it like there, right? And then whatever someone tells you, because depending on who's asking you, right, you might answer differently. If someone is asking you to tell you about themselves at a bar, your answer is probably going to be different than if they're asking you in a classroom, right? And so after we gave people time to actually give the answer they were going to give, we also asked what their job title was, more specifically, what are some things that they did and how many years they've been in that role. And then also, how did their campus or last campus, if they were in between jobs, classify that position? Is it tenure track or not, faculty or not, permanent or temporary? And y'all can see the same thing with that second question, right? In this case, we were trying to get at sort of career challenges and being mid-career specifically and why people choose to stay or leave in specific jobs. And you can kind of see the logic between these. Okay, so whichever you choose, you'll have to decide on their format before turning them into IRV, like I mentioned. These instruments can be built with Qualtrics. I just want to point that out for y'all. So please don't feel like you have to go outside of, you're already paying for Qualtrics, so use it. It makes all kinds of things. You can, if you really want to use like SurveyMonkey or some other thing, you can, but why reinvent the wheel when you already have access to it? And also for interview questions, your study design will be important, which is why thinking hard in the beginning will save you time. And so the other reason I mentioned this is, in my case, the last project that I did that was IRB approved, we had to get grant funding for it first, which means we had to take time to write up the grant proposal. And they wanted our questions to be specified in a certain way that didn't make sense for how we would actually ask them to interviewees. And so not only did we have to take more time to do that, but we also had to turn it into IRB differently. And so that's sort of what I mean by that. Okay, so also if you have funding or sponsor information, like I'm just mentioning, depending on your grant source, you might, I guess it depends on the order of operations. In our case, we got the grant first and then submitted the IRB proposal. Other people might submit the proposal and then find out they need grant funding for something. Like, let's say, you want to interview from the beginning, and then after you get it approved and you did all that work, you thought, oh, it might be interesting and it might be nice to provide the participants with like an Amazon gift card. And so then you go find the grant, right? It doesn't really matter. I'm mentioning this here because if you did already write it up, then it'll kind of help you with your writing for IRB, but I wouldn't copy paste exactly, I would tweak. And so next, you may also be asked to write another detailed description with new information. And for interview questions, once again, like I said, your study design will be important. In my case, also, the way we had to specify our interview questions, we had to make 2 big research questions and then also put 3 or 4 detailed ones underneath, which is much different than the example you just saw with the question 1 ABC, question 2 ABC. And we eventually had 25 of those ABC-like questions. And so once again, your front end work might save you some time. That's all I'm saying here. Okay, consent forms. So you have to write these out as well. You can find examples of them online, but I recommend making sure that, just double check that you have all the stuff you're supposed to have on there. So they need to include study benefits, study risks, that everyone's participation is voluntary, and also that they can leave the study at any time if they feel uncomfortable. That is like totally key. If you do any research looking up the ones that are already available, they don't always say that. So you definitely need to specify that or your consent form will get kicked back to you. You need to explain what will be done with the data, especially now. If some of you were on the last session, actually talking about AI, though it's integrated into some things, I will say new AI and generative AI, definitely, you've got to take a little bit more time to see if it makes sense to use certain tools when you're doing, especially interviews, because I'll just say read the terms and conditions. Because for instance, one of the things that I used in my last project is Atlas TI, which is a coding software. And if I and my co-investigators had used their AI tool, what it said at the time was they're training their AI, right? And we would have ceased to own our own interviews and transcripts 30 days after we used the tool. And also, we went through a lot of trouble to de-identify the participants, and they would have undone that work. So, not saying you're going to have that problem, but that's just a caveat I'll say about AI, because I know everyone is sort of focused on ChatGPT for writing, but there's a lot of AI tools that you just really need to read the terms and conditions. That's what I'll say, and be really clear about what you'll do with people's data, both on the front end and also thinking about that when you're using other tools. Okay, so as far as confidentiality is concerned, you need to specify if you're assigning code names, which I'm sure y'all have read at this point. What will be done with research notes and documents? Like I said, usually the principal investigator is the one who's charged with keeping notes, keeping the transcripts, giving access to other folks. And this is some old language just from IRB software in general, but our old version specified that someone needed to keep the printed things in a locked cabinet. So I don't think you have to do that with Cayuse. However, if you do see something like that, then you need to task someone with that. They've got to make sure anything written stays locked up or encrypted. So that's just a thing to think about. And you've got to write out exactly how that's going to happen and who's going to be in charge of it. All right, so considerations for group writing. We're almost done. I know we're almost out of time, I promise. I'm almost done here, and I will show you some things real quick on the library website. Okay, so mechanics of group writing. I know all of y'all, some of you are doing individual projects, but if you are doing any kind of group writing, from the beginning, you want to think about how that's going to happen. Does that mean once a week on Fridays? Does that mean we all block out a week in September and then meet like 4 times? Does that mean you get the conclusion and I get the lit review and someone else is doing further research, you know what I mean? So you'll definitely want to think about that in the beginning because everyone's writing style is different. You'll have to build in some time to actually like blend your voice, especially if you assign parts. And then especially if you're doing research across institutions, then you have to think about things like time zone, which is often a thing. I take the L on here because it's much easier for me to get up at 8 and be here for an 11 a.m. meeting on the East Coast than it is for a lot of people to still have, you know, the brain power to work with me at 1 here when it's 4 for them. So you might want to think about that. Phases relates to that kind of like, are we all doing the lit review or pulling together the articles and then we'll figure out how to write it? What will change? Like, for instance, I had a co-investigator have an illness during this. And so in an effort to not leave her behind, we kind of just paused the project. And so things could change. You get the point. Just make sure you have a plan at the beginning. So then if you need to tweak it, you can tweak it easily. You also want to think about and should have thought about from the beginning, like I mentioned, how you'll disseminate things because journals, conferences, presentations all require different things. I am going to show you that we have some resources for how to put together a poster if that's the first step you want to take, which we didn't have before. So I want to point that out to y'all. And then delays and modifications, they happen. You might get delays on forms, those extra emails you didn't know you needed, like I mentioned. And also things like participant updates. People drop out of studies all the time, y'all, for reasons that have nothing to do with you. Maybe they're the person who came down with an illness or they were interested in August and by September, they're just like, I don't feel like doing this. You know what I mean? Or they agreed to, you specified you were going to have 90-minute interviews and they don't really want to talk over half an hour. Like things happen all the time. So just know you'll have some delays, you'll have some modifications, but that's okay. Okay, and then transcription and write-up. So you'll want to consider vendors, I think, in the beginning. It just makes your life easier because once again, you'll have to talk to that pesky finance person at some point, and it'll be so much easier if you know what the vendor requires. And that is because UNLV often has lists of what's called known vendors. They might be described differently in your department, but usually because it's less work, your finance person will encourage you to go with someone we already have vetted, right? But if you know that you need to use this other company for X reason, then you'll have to do some writing up of forms because there's always writing, right? To get them to become a known vendor. And so it helps if you have a few in mind to begin with, because then you know if you need to do the work or not. And also, let's say I asked my finance person for people we already had because I was fine with doing the easier way. And all 5 of them at that point in the year were too busy. Like they had too much work because we had some local ones. She was too busy. Some of the other ones we couldn't, because of a finance turnover thing, we couldn't use them. And so stuff just happens. You also want to think about those AI tools, like I mentioned. AI is, I'm not saying be anti-AI, just know that it's not all created equal. And you're giving different permissions for different things. You always want to protect your, in my case, interviewee data. And if I had just clicked through to the AI tool in that coding software, I would have totally violated my IRB agreement by keeping people's things confidential because they wouldn't have them anymore. And then if you're doing coding, you need time to write up memos for the codes because you got to pull out the themes, have the memos, compare with your co-investigators. There's always more writing, y'all. That's what I have to say. Okay, and if you're collaborating with scholars from elsewhere, just know you got to do a double IRB submission. So that means twice the writing because maybe the forms are different. You'll need to keep abreast of the scheduling in both institutions. So I will say in my experience, generally IRBs tend to meet at the beginning of the month, but that's not always the case. They might meet on the 3rd Tuesday of every month or something like that. In Georgia, it may meet on the 1st Monday here or something, but you've got to keep that in mind, which means your writing deadlines need to sort of meet up before you need to submit things, right? And then also creating a schedule of meetings and figuring out group dynamics. That's its own like psychosocial personal thing, right? But yeah, if someone doesn't like the way someone else works early on, it's going to be hard to do like a group writing project, right? And so it's just easier to hammer this stuff out in the beginning. And that's why I say it's never just about the writing. Okay, so now that I've talked your head off for like 50 minutes, if I've learned 2 important lessons in life, I can't recall the first one because it's the end of the day. But also the second one is that I need to start writing stuff down. And that's the thing you'll want to keep in mind as you're doing all of this, whether it's shorthand, whether you're an iPad person, a laptop person, whether you're a notes in your phone person. When inspiration strikes, write it down, y'all, because you'll probably need it later and you will forget because we're a distractible bunch, right? Okay, so most of you know who I am. If you have a question about research in the social sciences, please email me or you can find me in the library directory. I know we have exactly 5 minutes, so I'm gonna stop sharing here and just show you very quickly the library website because I don't see any questions in the chat. Nope, that's the wrong thing. Sorry, y'all, this is why I have too many things open. Also the wrong thing. Whoops. How do I escape? Sorry, I feel like I'm an old person. Okay, no offense to old people out there. I don't want anyone coming after me for that. Okay, all right, so just really quickly, I want to show y'all some things that have to do with a lot of what I talked about here that isn't necessarily IRB specific. So if you go under research guides, most of y'all have been in this before, so I know you know where you're going. But if not, you can always go to the research bar request tab.
Brittany, we cannot see. Are you showing the
yeah,
are
thanks
you
for
showing the
stopping.
browser right now, the UNLV libraries? We can't see it. We're stuck on the
Okay,
PowerPoint slides.
so sorry.
Oh, it's all good.
Thanks for pointing that out.
Of course.
Okay, I think you can. Are you still seeing PowerPoint slides? Because I see something
we
that says.
cannot see anything right now.
Okay.
We see you right now.
Okay, well, since we're at 3:56, why don't I do this? Because I was gonna email none of these slides anyway. Okay. I will send some screenshots for y'all of where to go in the research guide and like a little list. The ones I was gonna highlight for you in particular are, we have a grants research guide. And so there's some local grants that you can get. There is also a list of all of these other education related places you can get grants. We have a guide for that. We have a scholarly communications guide, which in library speak means where do you want to get published? How do you want to set up your researcher ID, which also, of course, requires a little bit of writing, and some other things that you're thinking about when you're actually trying to disseminate. We have a technology guide. So for those of you who are doing anything that has to do with geography or anything like that, we do have a GIS specialist who can help you do that stuff before you have to write up what it means that you made up these visual things, right? And then we also have a multimedia and design guide that will help you with your poster design if you're starting with a poster instead of a presentation. And so I know that's a lot right at the end, but when I send these slides over, since I updated them from the last time, I will send y'all a little blurb so you can go through and write them. And wherever they end up getting posted in Canvas or whatever, I'll try to make sure that they get posted with the instructions. Whew, all right, thank you for hanging in there. That was a lot of talking, y'all. Thank you for hanging around.
Thank you so much, Brittany, for your energy. Oh, sorry, somebody has a question.
No, yeah, okay. The best way to get a hold of you is to email?
Yes, and I saw your email. I promised to reply to you right after this. I just haven't had time.
That is okay. I probably just need to make an appointment and talk about all this. So thank you, and I'll see you.
Okay, see you soon.
Well, seems like no one else has questions. Thank you for your great energy, and thank you for your time for being here and expanding our knowledge. So thank you so much, Brittany, again, for sharing your time and expertise with us today. And thank you to our participants for joining us to expand their knowledge. We'll be posting this workshop on the Graduate College YouTube channel for your reference. Once again, our next workshop will be at tomorrow, which is Thursday at 12 p.m. here on Zoom. We hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you so much again, Brittany. Have a nice day, everyone.
Bye, y'all.